The massive chamber of the Galactic Council stretched as far as the eye could see. Floating platforms held representatives from 47 different alien species, each one more strange and wonderful than the last. The air hummed with the soft buzz of universal translators working overtime to convert dozens of languages into something everyone could understand. Ambassador Lisa Martinez sat perfectly still on the human platform, her dark suit a stark contrast to the colorful robes and exotic forms surrounding her. She had been Earth's chief diplomat for 8 years now, and she had seen many heated debates in this chamber. But today felt different. Today felt dangerous. The Zephyrian Prime Minister rose from his crystal platform, his body shimmering like a living diamond in the chamber's artificial light. When he spoke, his voice carried through the translator with the weight of authority that came from ruling one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations. Honored members of the Galactic Council, he began, his words echoing in the vast space. We have gathered here today to address a problem that can no longer be ignored. Since humanity joined our peaceful community 50 years ago, they have brought nothing but violence and chaos to our galaxy. Lisa felt her stomach tighten, but she kept her face calm. She had expected this day would come eventually. The other species had been whispering about humanity for months now, their concerns growing louder with each passing week. Look at the facts, the Zephyrian continued, gesturing with one of his many crystalline arms. In just 5 decades, humans have been involved in more military conflicts than the Arcturians fought in their first 1,000 years of space travel. They carry weapons everywhere they go. Their ships are armed for war, not exploration. Their very language is filled with violent metaphors. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber like waves on a pond. Lisa could see alien heads nodding, their various forms of expression all showing the same thing: fear and disapproval. The Centaurian delegate stood next, her tall, graceful form swaying slightly as she spoke. Her people were known for their love of art and philosophy, and their voice carried the musical quality that made them such popular diplomats. The Zephyrian speaks truth, she said, her translated words somehow retaining their melodic quality. Human history is written in blood. They have fought wars on their own planet for thousands of years. When they reached the stars, they simply brought their violence with them. Captain Jake Morrison, who sat beside Lisa as Earth's military representative, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His uniform, once a source of pride, now felt like evidence in a trial where humanity was the defendant. Another voice joined the chorus of accusations. The Andromedan representative, a being that looked like living liquid contained in a transparent suit, rose to speak. We have documented 17 separate incidents where human forces engaged in combat operations in neutral space. 17 times in 50 years. No other species has such a record. Lisa wanted to stand up and defend her people, but she knew that interrupting now would only make things worse. She had to wait for the formal accusations to be made before she could respond. That was how the council worked, as she had to respect their procedures even when they were being used against humanity. The Arcturian chancellor, ancient beyond human comprehension, slowly raised himself from his platform. His species had been traveling the stars when humans were still learning to make fire, and his words carried the weight of eons. Young species often struggle with the transition from planetary to galactic citizenship, he said, his voice like distant thunder. But humanity's pattern of behavior suggests something more troubling. They seem to actively seek out conflict. They volunteer for dangerous missions. They rush toward danger when wise beings would retreat. More nods, more murmurs of agreement. Lisa could feel the mood of the chamber turning against humanity like a tide pulling away from shore. The Tausetian delegate, a small furry creature with large, intelligent eyes, added his voice to the growing chorus. On Vega Station, human security forces used what they call excessive force to stop a simple trade dispute. 3 beings were hospitalized. The humans said they were preventing a riot, but surveillance footage shows they escalated the situation. Captain. Morrison's jaw tightened. Lisa knew he had read the real report about Vega Station. The simple trade dispute had been a slave auction, and the excessive force had freed 24 kidnapped children. But how could they explain that to beings who had never seen such cruelty? The accusations continued for another hour. Each species seemed to have a story about human aggression, human violence, human unwillingness to follow proper diplomatic channels. They spoke of humans who fought first and asked questions later. They talked about human ships that responded to distress calls with weapons ready. They mentioned human colonies that maintained standing armies even in peaceful sectors. Finally, the Zephyrian Prime Minister stood again, his crystalline form catching the light as he prepared to deliver what everyone knew would be the formal charges. "The evidence is clear and undeniable," he declared, his voice ringing through the chamber like a bell. "Humanity is a war-loving species. They are addicted to violence and conflict. They cannot coexist peacefully with civilized beings because peace is foreign to their nature." The chamber fell silent except for the gentle hum of the translation systems. "Therefore," the Zephyrian continued, "we propose immediate sanctions against all human activities in galactic space. We call for restrictions on human expansion, limitations on human military forces, and mandatory supervision of human diplomatic missions. Until humanity can prove they have evolved beyond their primitive violent tendencies, they should not be treated as equals in our peaceful community." The silence that followed was deafening. Lisa could feel the weight of billions of eyes upon her, waiting to see how humanity would respond to this devastating accusation. She looked around the chamber at the faces and forms of beings she had worked with for years. Some looked sad, as if they regretted the necessity of what they were doing. Others looked angry, as if humanity had personally betrayed them. A few looked afraid, as if they expected human delegates to pull out weapons and start shooting right there in the council chamber. But what hurt Lisa the most were the ones who looked disappointed. These were beings who had believed in humanity, who had supported Earth's application for council membership, who had worked beside human diplomats and scientists and explorers. Now they sat in silence, unable or unwilling to defend the species they had once called friends. Captain Morrison leaned over and whispered quietly, "What do we do now?" Lisa took a deep breath and stood up slowly. The chamber's attention focused on her like a spotlight, and she knew that whatever she said next would determine humanity's future among the stars. "Honored council members," she began, her voice steady. "Despite the fire building in her chest, you have made serious accusations against my people. As Earth's representative, I request the opportunity to respond to these charges." The Zephyrian Prime Minister nodded graciously, his diplomatic training overriding his obvious distaste for what he considered a violent species. "The Council recognizes Ambassador Martinez," he announced formally. "You have 3 days to prepare your response. We will reconvene to hear humanity's defense before we vote on the proposed sanctions." As the session ended and the various delegates began filing out of the chamber, Lisa remained standing on the human platform, watching the beings who held her species' fate in their hands. 3 days to defend all of human history. 3 days to explain why her people fought. 3 days to save humanity's place in the galaxy. She had never faced a more important challenge in her life. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Within hours of the council session ending, every major news network was broadcasting the same shocking headline: Galactic Council considers sanctions against war-loving humans. The footage of the accusations played on repeat, translated into hundreds of languages and broadcast to billions of beings across thousands of worlds. Ambassador Lisa Martinez sat in her quarters aboard the diplomatic vessel Use Harmony, watching the coverage. With growing dismay, the reporters seemed to focus on the most damaging quotes, playing them over and over until they became burned into the public consciousness. "Humanity is a war-loving species," the Zephyrian Prime Minister's words echoed from the viewscreen. "They are addicted to violence and conflict." Her aide, Peter Williams, knocked softly before entering with a cup of coffee and a grim expression. "The initial response is not good, Ambassador," he said quietly. 3 major trade agreements have been suspended pending the Council's decision. The Andromedan Consortium has closed 2 shipping routes to human vessels, citing security concerns. Lisa rubbed her temples, feeling a headache building behind her eyes. What about our allies? The Regellians are standing by us publicly, but their trade minister advised our embassy to prepare for economic disruption. The Taotians issued a statement supporting fair treatment for all species, but stopped short of defending us directly. Peter hesitated before continuing. The Centaurians haven't said anything at all. On Earth, the reaction was just as intense but very different. President Nancy Collins called an emergency cabinet meeting in the White House Situation Room. The mood was tense as Earth's top officials gathered around the long table, their faces reflecting the gravity of the situation. "This is a disaster," Secretary of State Kevin Barnes muttered, shuffling through a stack of diplomatic cables. "I've got reports of human civilians being harassed on space stations across 3 sectors. Some alien businesses are refusing to serve human customers." Dr. Helen Rodriguez, Earth's leading expert on alien cultures, shook her head in frustration. "They're taking everything out of context," she said. "Yes, we've been involved in conflicts, but they're ignoring why we fought." Defense Secretary Frank Miller leaned forward, his weathered face showing years of military experience. "What they're really afraid of is competition," he said bluntly. "Human technology has advanced faster in 50 years than some of these species managed in centuries. Our agricultural innovations have revolutionized food production on a dozen worlds. Our medical research has saved millions of alien lives." President Collins nodded slowly. "Fear often wears the mask of moral outrage," she agreed. "But that doesn't help Lisa right now. She needs ammunition to fight back with." Meanwhile, aboard the Use Harmony, Captain Jake Morrison was dealing with more immediate concerns. His communications officer, Lucy Thompson, looked up from her console with worry written across her face. "Sir, we're getting disturbing reports from Kepler Station," Thompson said. "A group of human traders were surrounded by an angry mob of Zephyrians. Station security had to escort them to safety." Morrison's jaw tightened. "Any violence?" "Not yet, but the situation is tense. The station commander is requesting that all human vessels avoid the area until things calm down." Cultural attaché Alex Chun, who had been quietly working at his terminal, suddenly straightened up. "I think I've found something," he said, excitement creeping into his voice. "I've been analyzing the incidents they cited in their accusations. There's a pattern here." Ambassador Martinez looked up from her own research. "What kind of pattern?" "Every single conflict they mentioned involved humans defending someone else," Chun explained, his fingers flying over his keyboard as he pulled up file after file. "The Battle of Kepler 7? We were responding to a distress call from Centaurian. Civilians under attack by slavers, the Vega system conflict? We stepped in when the Tyranid Collective was trying to force the Taotians off their homeworld." Dr. Rodriguez, who had joined the ship's crew via secure communication link from Earth, nodded enthusiastically. "That's exactly what I've been finding in my research. The Andromedan mining incident. Human ships intervened to stop illegal strip mining operations that were destroying inhabited worlds. But they're not presenting it that way," Peter Williams pointed out. "They're making it sound like we just showed up and started shooting." Captain Morrison stood up and began pacing, his military mind working through the implications. "It's a classic propaganda technique," he said. "Present the facts but leave out the context. Make the defender look like the aggressor." On the view screen, the news coverage continued. A Zephyrian political analyst was explaining why humans were fundamentally different from other galactic species. "They have what their own historians call a warrior culture," the analyst said. "Their entertainment focuses on conflict. Their sports involve physical violence. Even their children play games about fighting." Ambassador Martinez felt her anger rising, but she forced herself to stay calm. Getting emotional now would not help anyone. Across the galaxy, the effects of the accusations were spreading. On Tau, Seti, an elderly veteran named Korvac, sat in his small apartment watching the news with growing disbelief. He remembered the Vega system conflict very differently than the council representatives were describing it. Korvac had been there when the Tyranid warships arrived. demanding that his people abandon their homeworld or face destruction. He had seen his government's desperate attempts at negotiation, their offers of tribute and compromise. He had watched Tyrannid soldiers land on his world and begin rounding up civilians for forced relocation, and he remembered the day human ships appeared in orbit, their young captain broadcasting a simple message. "This is Captain Sarah Hayes of the Earth Defense Force Tyrannid vessels. You will cease hostile operations immediately and withdraw from this system." The Tyrannids had laughed at the small human fleet. They had 13 heavy cruisers against 3 human destroyers. It should have been no contest, but the humans had not fought like any species the Tyrannids had encountered before. They had used tactics that seemed impossible, maneuvers that should have destroyed their own ships. And when the battle was over, 12 Tyrannid cruisers were floating dead in space and Tau Ceti was free. Korvac reached for his communication device and began typing a message to the Council. If they wanted to discuss human violence, he had a few things to say about it. Similar scenes were playing out across dozens of worlds. Beings who had personal experience with human aggression began to remember those encounters differently than the official records suggested. Back on the Use Harmony, Ambassador Martinez was preparing for the fight of her life. She had 3 days to change the minds of beings who had already decided that humanity was too dangerous for civilized society. 3 days to reframe 50 years of human history. 3 days to save her species' future among the stars. "Alex," she said to her, "cultural attach, I want you to compile every record we have of human military actions. Not the official reports, but the real stories. Find me witnesses, survivors, anyone who was actually there. Lucy," she continued, turning to the communications officer, "I need you to reach out to every human ship, every human colony, every human organization in Council space. If they have first-hand knowledge of why we fought, I want to hear from them. Peter, coordinate with Earth. I want complete files on every conflict they mentioned, including enemy communications, tactical analysis, everything." She paused, looking around at her team. "We're not just defending our military record here. We're defending our right to exist as equals in this galaxy. The other species think they know what makes humans dangerous. It's time we showed them what makes us human." Outside the ship's viewports, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the political storm raging across the galaxy, but among those stars on hundreds of worlds, beings who owed their freedom to human courage were beginning to remember why they should be grateful rather than afraid. Ambassador Lisa Martinez stood alone in her private quarters aboard the Use Harmony, staring out at the infinite darkness of space. 2 days had passed since the accusations, and sleep had become impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of the council members, their expressions ranging from disappointment to outright fear when they looked at her species. The weight of representing all of humanity pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force. She had spent her entire adult life in diplomatic service, working her way up from a junior trade negotiator to Earth's chief representative to the galaxy. She had negotiated mining rights with the crystal beings of Arcturus, established cultural exchange programs with the artistic Centaurians, and helped draft the galactic trade protocols that governed commerce across 17 sectors, but nothing in her 23 years of experience had prepared her for this moment. This was not about trade deals or cultural misunderstandings. This was about humanity's very right to exist as equals among the stars. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Peter Williams entered quietly, carrying a steaming cup of coffee and a data pad filled with the latest intelligence reports. "The preliminary vote count came in from our sources in the council," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "It's not good news, Ambassador. We're looking at a 68% majority in favor of sanctions." Lisa took the coffee gratefully, letting the warm liquid steady her nerves. "What about our allies?" "The Regelians are holding firm, and the Tausetians issued a stronger statement this morning supporting us, but they're being pressured hard by the larger species." Peter hesitated before continuing. "The Vegan Republic is wavering. Their delegate received a personal visit from the Zephyrian Prime Minister yesterday. Lisa nodded grimly. She had expected this. The Zephyrians were one of the most influential species in the Council, and their crystal technology was essential to galactic communications. Few species would risk their displeasure over humanity. There's more, Peter continued. Our intelligence sources suggest this isn't just about our military history. There are economic factors at play here. Human innovations in agriculture and technology have disrupted several established markets. Some species are seeing their profits drop as human alternatives become available. Dr. Helen Rodriguez appeared on the room's communication screen, calling in from her office on Earth. Her usually neat appearance was disheveled, and her eyes showed the strain of working around the clock. I've been analyzing their accusations. All night, she said without preamble. Lisa, there's a definite pattern here. Every conflict they cited has one thing in common. Humans were defending someone weaker than themselves. Lisa set down her coffee and moved closer to the screen. Explain. The war with the Kree Dominion that they mentioned? We were protecting Centauran colonies from slavers. The Beetlejuice incident? Human forces stopped a major slave trading operation that was kidnapping civilians from 6 different worlds. The conflict in the Outer Rim? We were helping the Andromedan mining colonies resist extortion from pirate fleets. Alex Chun, who had been working tirelessly in the ship's research center, entered the room with his arms full of data crystals and printed reports. Dr. Rodriguez is right, he said, spreading the materials across Lisa's desk. I've gone through every incident they mentioned, and I've found something interesting. In most cases, the species that are now accusing us of aggression were either the ones being defended or they refused to help when asked. Lisa felt something shift inside her as she looked at the evidence her team had gathered. The careful diplomatic mask she had worn for decades began to crack, revealing the anger that had been building since the accusations began. Show me the Kepler-7 incident, she said quietly. Alex pulled up a holographic display showing the tactical situation. 3 Centaurian civilian transports were captured by Arcturian slavers, he began. The Centauran government requested council intervention, but the council voted to pursue diplomatic solutions. That process was estimated to take 6 months. How many civilians were on those transports? Lisa asked. 837, Dr. Rodriguez answered from the screen, including 212 children. Human ships responded to the distress call within 18 hours, Alex continued. Captain David Kelly's task force engaged the slaver vessels and freed all the civilians. Total human casualties, 14 dead, 31 wounded. Civilian casualties, 0. Lisa stared at the tactical display, remembering her own reaction when she had first heard about Kepler-7. She had been proud of Captain Kelly and his crew. Now that same action was being used as evidence that humans were too violent for civilized society. What about the Vega system? She asked. Peter took over this briefing. The Tyranid Collective claimed the Tau-Cetian homeworld was strategically necessary for their expansion. They demanded that the Tau-Cetians relocate to a smaller world in the same system. When the Tau-Cetians refused, the Tyranids began bombing civilian targets. The Council's response? Lisa asked, though she already knew the answer. Economic sanctions against the Tyranid Collective, to be implemented over a 2-year period, Peter replied with obvious disgust. Meanwhile, Tau-Cetian cities were being destroyed daily. Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward on the screen. Captain Sarah Hayes arrived with 3 destroyers against 13 Tyranid cruisers. The odds were impossible, but she gave the Tyranids an ultimatum anyway: withdraw or face the consequences. They laughed at her, Alex added. Right up until she destroyed 12 of their ships in 37 minutes. Lisa felt the fire in her chest growing stronger. These were not the actions of a war-loving species. These were the actions of beings who could not stand by and watch innocents suffer. What about the economic angle Peter mentioned? She asked. Dr. Rodriguez pulled up a series of charts showing trade data. Human agricultural technology has increased food production on 43 worlds by an average of 300%. Our medical advances have eliminated diseases that killed millions annually. Our manufacturing processes have reduced the cost of basic goods across entire sectors, and that threatens established interests, Peter concluded. The Arcturian medical cartels, the Zephyrian technology monopolies, the Andromedan agricultural combines. We're not just being accused of being violent. We're being accused of being too successful. Lisa walked back to the viewport watching. The stars streamed past as the ship continued toward the council station. The pieces were falling into place now. The accusations were not really about human violence. They were about human success, human innovation, and most importantly, human willingness to act when others would not. They fear us, she said quietly. Not because we're violent, but because we remind them of something they've lost. What's that? Alex asked. Lisa turned back to her team, and they could see that something fundamental had changed in their ambassador. The careful diplomat was still there, but beneath that surface was something harder, something that had been forged in the fires of human history. The willingness to fight for what's right, even when it's dangerous, she said. They've become so civilized, so refined that they've forgotten how to defend civilization itself. She moved to her desk and began pushing aside the carefully prepared speeches her team had written over the past 2 days. Diplomatic language, political double-talk, careful phrases designed to offend no one and convince no one. "Ma'am," Peter said uncertainly, "what are you doing?" "I'm throwing out everything we've prepared," Lisa said firmly. "I'm not going to stand before the council and apologize for saving lives. I'm not going to use diplomatic language to hide from the truth." Dr. Rodriguez looked concerned. "Lisa, you need to be careful. One wrong word could make this situation much worse." Lisa smiled for the first time in days, but it was not a diplomat smile. It was the smile of someone who had finally decided to stop hiding who they really were. "Helen, they've already decided we're dangerous," she said. "Maybe it's time we reminded them why that might not be such a bad thing." As the Use Harmony approached the council station, Ambassador Lisa Martinez made a decision that would echo through galactic history. She would not deliver a carefully crafted political speech designed to mollify fears and preserve the status quo. Instead, she would speak from the heart of what it meant to be human, even if it meant risking everything her species had built among the stars. The Galactic Council chamber had never seen such a crowd. Every seat was filled, every platform occupied, and additional viewing areas had been opened to accommodate the unprecedented number of beings who wanted to witness what many expected to be humanity's political execution. News crews from across the galaxy positioned their recording equipment in every available space. Their cameras focused on the central podium where Earth's fate would be decided. Ambassador Lisa Martinez stood in the preparation area beside the main chamber, listening to the buzz of hundreds of alien voices speaking in dozens of languages. Through the transparent wall, she could see the assembled delegates taking their places, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile to sadly resigned. Captain Jake Morrison stood beside her, his dress uniform crisp and formal, but his face showing the strain of the past 3 days. "The intelligence reports came in this morning," he said quietly. 71% are expected to vote for sanctions. "Ma'am, I have to ask, are you sure about this approach?" Lisa looked down at the datapad in her hands. It contained the carefully crafted speech her diplomatic team had prepared, full of measured language and political compromises. 3 days of work by some of the finest minds in human diplomacy. She powered off the device and set it aside. Sure, Jake," she said, her voice calm but carrying an edge that made him look at her more closely. "If we're going to lose, we're going to lose on our own terms." The chamber's announcement system crackled to life, and the universal translator began broadcasting in every known language. "The Galactic Council recognizes Ambassador Lisa Martinez of Earth to present humanity's response to the charges brought against them." Lisa walked into the chamber, and the noise died away as if someone had thrown a switch. Every eye, sensor, and optical organ in the vast space focused on her as she made her way to the central podium. Her footsteps echoed in the sudden silence, each step carrying the weight of human history. She reached the podium and looked out at the assembled beings who held her species' future in their hands. No notes, no prepared statements, no diplomatic safety nets. Just the truth and whatever courage she could find in her heart. Honored members of the Galactic Council, she began, her voice steady but carrying an undertone that made several alien representatives shift uncomfortably in their seats. You have accused humanity of being war-loving. You have painted us as violent savages unfit for civilized society. I stand before you today not to deny our capacity for violence, but to explain why we fight. The chamber remained absolutely silent. Even the usual background hum of translation equipment seemed muted, as if the machines themselves were holding their breath. You cite the Battle of Kepler 7 as evidence of human aggression, Lisa continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. What you conveniently forget to mention is what we found when we arrived at that system. Arcturian slaver ships loading Centaurian children onto transport vessels. 837 civilians, including 212 children, bound for the slave markets of the Outer Rim? Several Centaurian delegates exchanged glances, their musical voices murmuring among themselves as they remembered that day differently than the official record suggested. Yes, we fought, Lisa said, her diplomatic mask beginning to slip away. Completely. We fought because no civilized being should stand by while children are sold into slavery. We fought because someone had to, and the rest of you were too busy debating proper procedures to act. The Arcturian representative, his ancient form shifting uneasily on his platform, started to speak, but Lisa's voice cut through his attempt at interruption. You mentioned the Vega system conflict as another example of human warmongering, she continued, passion bleeding through her training with every word. Let me tell you what really happened at Vega. The Tyranid Collective decided that the peaceful Tausetians were too weak to deserve their homeworld. Tyranid warships began bombing civilian targets while this council debated economic sanctions that would take 2 years to implement. The Tausetian delegate, his small furry form trembling with emotion, nodded slowly as memories of those dark days flooded back. Who stood with the Tausetians when their cities burned? Lisa asked, her voice rising. Not the great and ancient civilizations of this council. Not the wise species who lecture us about proper diplomatic channels. It was 18-year-old human men and women who died in the vacuum of space so that Tausetian children could grow up free. The chamber erupted in uncomfortable murmurs, but Lisa pressed on, her voice now carrying the full force of her conviction. You want to know what makes humans dangerous? She said, stepping away from the podium and walking closer to the assembled delegates. It's not that we love war. It's that we cannot stand by and watch injustice. When the Andromedan Consortium was strip-mining inhabited worlds for profit, destroying entire ecosystems while the native populations begged for help, where was this council? The Andromedan representative, his liquid form rippling with what might have been shame, remained silent. You were forming committees, Lisa continued, her voice dripping with contempt. You were scheduling hearings. You were debating proper procedures while children died from toxic poisoning. We didn't wait for your permission, we acted. She paused, looking around the chamber at faces that showed a range of emotions from shock to anger to something that might have been recognition. Every single conflict you have cited today has one thing in common, she said, her voice now carrying the authority of absolute conviction. Humans standing up for those who could not stand up for themselves. Yes, we are capable of incredible violence, but we save it for those who prey on the weak, who trade in suffering, who believe that might makes right. The silence in the chamber was now so complete that the ambient sounds of the station's life support systems seemed loud by comparison. You fear us because we remind you of something you have forgotten in your ancient wisdom and comfortable civilizations. Lisa continued, her words cutting through the silence like a blade. Sometimes the only way to preserve peace is to be willing to fight for it. You have grown so civilized, so refined, that you have lost the will to defend civilization itself. The Zephyrian Prime Minister started to rise from his crystal platform, But Lisa's next words stopped him cold. "When the slavers come for your children, who will you call?" she asked. "When the tyrants decide your world would look better as a mining colony, who will stand between you and them? When pirates threaten your trade routes and this council is too busy debating to act, who will protect you?" She looked directly at the Centauran delegate as she continued. "Ask the children of Kepler-7 who saved them. Ask the survivors of Vega who gave them hope. Ask the families on a dozen worlds who sleep safely because human ships patrol the darkness between the stars." The Centauran delegate slowly stood, her graceful form swaying as emotion overcame her usual diplomatic composure. "The human speaks." "Truth," she said, her musical voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "My own daughter was among those saved at Kepler-7. How quickly we forget. How easily we allow fear to rewrite history." Lisa felt the tide in the chamber beginning to turn, but she was not finished yet. "You call us war-loving," she said, her voice now carrying the full weight of human history and human sacrifice. "But we do not fight because we love war. We fight because we love everything that war threatens to destroy. We fight because we would rather die standing than live kneeling. We fight because someone must, and we refuse to wait for someone else to find the courage." The chamber was no longer silent. Voices were rising from platforms across the vast space, some in anger, others in what sounded like agreement or even admiration. "If that makes us dangerous," Lisa concluded, her voice ringing across the chamber like a bell, "then perhaps this galaxy needs more dangerous species and fewer civilized ones." She turned and walked back toward the human platform, leaving behind a chamber in chaos and a galaxy that would never look at humanity the same way again. The silence in the Galactic Council chamber lasted exactly 17 seconds after Ambassador Lisa Martinez finished speaking. Then chaos erupted like a dam bursting under pressure. Delegates leaped from their platforms, alien voices rose in dozens of languages, and the translation system struggled to keep up with the flood of emotion pouring through the vast space. Within minutes, the footage of Lisa's speech was racing across galactic communication networks at faster-than-light speeds. Every major news organization broadcast the speech in full, and social media platforms across hundreds of worlds exploded with commentary, debate, and something that had been missing from the discussion until now, the voices of those who had actually been saved by human intervention. On Centauri Prime, thousands of citizens gathered in the Capitol Plaza before the government buildings. They carried signs written in both Centauran script and human languages, with messages like, "Thank you, Earth, and never forget Kepler-7." The crowd grew larger by the hour as beings who had stayed silent during the accusations finally found their voices. Prime Minister Zara Kethis stood at her office window, watching the demonstration below with tears flowing down her graceful features. Her aide approached cautiously, knowing that his leader was struggling with emotions she rarely showed in public. "Ma'am, the Council of Ministers is requesting an emergency session," the aide said quietly. Zara wiped her eyes and turned away from the window. "Call the session," she said, her musical voice heavy with determination. "It is time we reminded the galaxy of who really saved our children." 2 hours later, Zara stood before the Centaurian Parliament, her usual diplomatic composure replaced by raw honesty that shocked the assembled ministers. "How quickly we forget," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "How easily we allow fear to rewrite history. I was there when human ships arrived at Kepler-7. I watched 19-year-old human soldiers die to save our children. My own daughter was among those rescued from the slaver ships." She paused, looking around at faces that showed surprise, shame, and growing recognition. "The human ambassador spoke the truth today," Zara continued. "While we debated proper procedures, our children were being sold in slave markets. While we formed committees, human families were losing sons and daughters to save ours. We owe them a debt that can never be repaid, and instead, we stood silent while others accused them of loving war." The Centauran Parliament erupted in discussion, but the message was clear. One of the galaxy's most respected civilizations was changing its position. Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy. On Tau Ceti, elderly veteran Korvac sat in a recording studio for the first time in his life, telling his story to a journalist who broadcast it to billions of viewers. "I was there during the vegan invasion," the old Tausetian said, his fur now gray with age but his eyes still bright with memory. "I watched Tyranid bombers destroy our cities while the council debated sanctions." When Captain Sarah Hayes arrived, with 3 human destroyers, she sent a message to 13 Tyranid cruisers: "Leave now or face the consequences." The journalist leaned forward, clearly moved by the emotion in the veteran's voice. "What happened next?" "The Tyranids laughed," Korvac said simply. "Right up until 12 of their ships were floating dead in space 37 minutes later. But you know what happened after the battle? Captain Hayes could have destroyed their remaining ship, taken prisoners, claimed our world as human territory. Instead, she gave medical aid to wounded Tyranid survivors and escorted them safely out of our system." The interview was broadcast across 17 sectors within hours, adding another voice to the growing chorus of beings who remembered human courage differently than the Council's accusations suggested, but perhaps the most shocking response came from an unexpected source. Fleet Admiral Susan Walker, formerly of the Andromedan Consortium Defense Force, released a public statement that sent shockwaves through the political establishment. Ambassador Martinez spoke the truth about Andromedan strip mining operations. Walker declared in a broadcast that reached every major network. The consortium's board ordered those operations despite knowing they would destroy inhabited worlds. When human ships arrived to intervene, they gave us a choice: cease operations or face the consequences. Walker paused, her liquid form rippling with what observers recognized as shame. "We chose to fight because we thought humans would be easy targets," she continued. "We were wrong about their military capability. But what shocked us afterward was not their strength in battle, but their mercy in victory. They could have destroyed our entire fleet, but instead they disabled our ships and provided medical aid to our wounded. That is not the action of a war-loving species. That is the action of beings who fight only when they must and show compassion even to their enemies." The political impact was immediate and devastating for those who had led the charges against humanity. The Zephyrian Prime Minister found himself increasingly isolated as former allies began reconsidering their positions. Economic interests that had seemed so important 3 days ago now looked petty and selfish in light of the stories emerging from across the galaxy. On Earth, President Nancy Collins watched the developments with amazement and growing hope. Her communications director burst into the Oval Office with the latest reports. "Ma'am, we're getting support from species we never expected," the aide said excitedly. "The Vegan Republic just issued a statement defending human actions. The Andromedan Trade Union is calling for new cooperation agreements. Even some Arcturian ministers are speaking out against the sanctions." 3 days after Lisa's speech, the Galactic Council reconvened for the final vote. The chamber was even more crowded than before, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Where there had been hostility and fear, there was now respect, uncertainty, and for many delegates, visible shame. The Zephyrian Prime Minister called for order, but his authority had been shattered by the week's revelations. When the roll call began, the result became clear within minutes. The motion to impose sanctions on humanity fails by a vote of 73 to 24. The Prime Minister announced, his crystalline form dulled with defeat, but the council was not finished. The Tausetian delegate rose and requested permission to introduce new legislation. "This council has been reminded of an important truth," the small being said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "There are times when diplomatic solutions are not enough. There are times when evil must be confronted with force. We propose the establishment of the Galactic Protection Initiative, a joint military force dedicated to defending those who cannot defend themselves." The proposal passed unanimously, with humanity taking a leading role in the command structure. Ambassador Lisa Martinez sat on the human platform, exhausted but victorious. She had done more than defend humanity's reputation. She had forced the galaxy to confront an uncomfortable truth about itself, that civilization without the courage to defend it was just a pretty word for cowardice. Captain Jake Morrison leaned over and whispered, "So what happens now?" Lisa smiled, the expression transforming her tired face. "Now we do what humans have always done," she said quietly. "We stand watch in the darkness so others can sleep safely in the light." As the session ended and delegates began filing out, many stopped to speak with Lisa personally. The Centaurian delegate took her hands in the traditional gesture of deep respect. The Tausetian representative bowed low in honor. Even some former opponents approached to offer grudging acknowledgement of her words. But it was a young Zephyrian aide who perhaps captured the moment best. As she passed Lisa in the corridor, she whispered in careful English, "Thank you for reminding us what courage looks like." The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. They were no longer seen as primitive warmongers, but as the species willing to stand between civilization and the darkness that threatened it. They were the guardians who fought not because they loved war, but because they loved everything that war could destroy. In the end, Ambassador Lisa Martinez had given humanity something more valuable than political victory. She had given them recognition for what they truly were, the protectors of those who could not protect themselves, the defenders of the innocent, the beings who would rather die standing than live kneeling. The universe was a safer place because humans were willing to be dangerous when danger was needed.